Hello, everybody. Peter Greenberg here with our global travel update for this first Thursday of May 2024. Yes, May is now here. This year is flying by. And of course, what a beautiful segue to talk about all the news that's happening. And let's start with the FAA. Of course, I'll be answering your questions. You know what to do if you've got some questions or comments for me. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, there's an FAA bill that's been essentially passed by Congress. It's in sort of a committee meeting right now to figure out a couple of nips and tucks, and then it goes to the president for signature. It's some good news. It's a step in the right direction. It doesn't accomplish everything we need it to accomplish as passengers, as citizens, and as safety folks, but it is a step in the right direction. First of all, it calls for the hiring of and the funding is now going to be available for more controllers. Let me give you a statistic. There are now 1,000 fewer air traffic controllers than there were 10 years ago. That is unacceptable. Staffing levels at air traffic control centers are below an 85% staff threshold in many of them. And just hiring them is not going to solve the problem. It's a 2 or 3 year steep learning curve. Last summer, you may remember the FAA actually appealed to airlines to reduce the frequency of their flights in the Northeast corridor because they didn't have the controllers to handle it. That may again happen this year. But what's also interesting in the bill is it's calling for increased rest periods for air traffic controllers. Duh. Right now, air traffic controllers in many ATCs are working mandatory overtime. That is the one job that nobody should work overtime in, and yet they're doing it. And so that's one. Another interesting thing about the FAA bill, which is something that the National Transportation Safety Board has been lobbying for decades, and it makes total common sense. And it wasn't as if the technology wasn't available. The airlines just didn't want to spend the money, and the FAA was moving at glacier-like speed. Well, now it's in the bill. It's something called a CVR. It's in every plane you fly. It's called the cockpit voice recorder. There's also one in the tail that records data. But the key one for most airline investigators when there's an accident or an incident is that CVR. But here's the problem. It only gives you the last 30 minutes of recorded conversations in the cockpit and can be easily or accidentally or intentionally overridden and erased. What the NTSB is asking for, and they're not going to get it, is the technology is available to install new CVRs that will give you the last 25 hours of recorded conversation in the cockpit. And you know what? It's high time they did that. So I'm glad to hear that. Two other items in the bill, which I think will give you some comfort. We all remember during the pandemic where the airlines steered people to get vouchers or credits instead of giving them the refunds that they were entitled to. But now, even if they're going to give you vouchers or credits, the new bill requires the airlines to give them an expiration date of 5 years, not 12 months. I think that's a win-win for everybody. But remember the DOT rule that gives you an automatic refund if your flight is delayed more than 3 hours domestically or more than 6 hours internationally, or if the airline cancels your flight for any reason, you don't have to be steered to a voucher or a credit. The only time you're going to get a voucher or a credit under the new rules is if you cancel a flight and there are no ticket change fees, you'll get that voucher or credit. The good news now is it's good for 5 years. Last but not least, a big problem for families traveling. There will no longer be charged for the opportunity of families sitting together on planes. So that's all good news. Speaking of seats, let's talk about Southwest Airlines. For decades, right? Open seating on Southwest Airlines, no assigned seats, no reserved seats, right? 3 boarding groups, A, B, and C. Pretty easy to understand. But Southwest has just had a miserable first quarter, as have other airlines. I'll get to that in a second. And they're looking to generate revenue. They're also installing newer, thinner seats in planes. And they're now considering, they haven't fully announced it yet, but they're now considering upgraded seats with more legroom, which of course they will price at a higher rate. The minute they do that, goodbye to open seating. Everybody gets an assigned seat. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I said the airlines have had a miserable first quarter, not just Southwest, but American. JetBlue stock last week tanked 18% on their earnings call. They had a miserable first quarter. Their loss was $700 million plus in the first quarter. A lot of that attributed to the breakup fees they had to pay when the Spirit merger deal did not go through. That was not good. Now, the DOT has announced some interesting baggage statistics for those of you who are still obsessed with checking bags. Which airline misplaced the most bags last year as a percentage of the bags they checked? Surprise, it was United. United checked in 75 million bags last year. They misplaced 551,000 of them. American did slightly better. They checked in 105 million bags last year, and they misplaced 800,000. But as a percentage, they did slightly better. And here's the irony. Let's go back to Southwest. The one airline that does not charge you to check bags, right? 2 bags free, as long as they're under 50 pounds. Guess what? They came in as one of the lowest percentages of misplaced bags. So interesting irony there. Now, this one I talk about all the time, and I'll make it Shakespearean. To recline or not recline? That is the question. That's, of course, if you can even recline. In the old days, that was about 4 months ago, coach airline seats on average would recline 4 inches. Now they recline about 2 inches if they recline at all. And the point that I have to make is, what's the point of that little button in the armrest if you push it, if the seat doesn't even go back? I'm going to roll a video that I ran last year. I have to run it again because it says everything about the inability to recline your seats. Let's see. Welcome aboard the brand new British Airways A320. Not exactly known for great legroom, as you can see, but they do have a sense of humor. I'm going to show you how the seat reclines. Are you ready? They actually came up with this as a design innovation. Amazing. Brilliant. Watch. Here we go. That's it. Want to see it again? Let's go. Ready? It reclines. That's it. Stupid. Yeah. Okay, so they can officially say their seats recline. Please, give us a break. The real problem, though, is, should you recline if your seat actually does? Because given the amount of legroom there's not there anymore between the back of your seat and the knees of the passenger behind you, if you recline, you'll spill their drinks, you'll crack their laptop screens, or worse. So it's basic etiquette. If you're going to recline your seat, don't ever do it during a mealtime, number one. And number two, if you want to do it, be polite. Go behind go to the passenger behind you and ask, is it okay if I do it? And then do it slowly. Don't just jam it back there. All right, but then that brings up some other personal space questions. And that is, in a 3-seat coach configuration, who gets the armrests? Right? Who gets the armrests? And I've given it some thought. And so here we go. The passenger in the window seat doesn't get any armrest. They get to lean against the window. The passenger in the aisle seat gets the armrest on the left, but there's a caution there. I'll get to that in a second. And then, of course, the passenger stuck in the dreaded draconian middle seat gets both armrests. Now, the caution I gave you about the aisle passenger is that if they lean to the left, if they're sitting on the right side of the plane, or lean to the right if they're sitting on the left side of the plane, they're about to get decapitated by the beverage cart. So the person who's in the worst position possible is in the aisle seat. So there's the etiquette. But then let's go one step beyond. Let's face it, folks, Americans are getting bigger. And some passengers are so big, they literally not only cannot fit into the seat they're given, they flow into the seat you're sitting in. So the question is, do overweight passengers deserve a second seat? And if so, who pays for it? It's a question that no one wants to answer. If you look at the contract of carriage of most carriers, they can actually throw you off a plane if you have, if you're not dressed properly, whatever that means. If you have offensive bodily odor, who determines that? Or if your size would impede a safe evacuation of the plane. Now, some airlines like Southwest have been somewhat innovative. They're letting overweight passengers get a second seat if it's available, and they may not have to pay for it. But it's an unanswered question, and one that has to be dealt with on a daily basis by anyone. And here's the unfortunate and awkward moment. If you're sitting in a seat and all of a sudden there's someone next to you who is clearly taking up more than their space because they're so overweight, they can't help themselves, right? What do? Most planes are full. Do you go to the flight attendant before the flight takes off and ask to change seats? And who's going to want to change seats with you? It's one of the great imponderables, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. Okay, so there's that story. Now we have other things to talk about. We do. Before we get to your questions and comments, you want to know what's going on in the Middle East? To give you an idea how crazy symbols are. Ethiopian Airlines, and we're talking about what's going on in Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank, Gaza. You get it. Ethiopian Airlines has a flight that goes every day from Addis Ababa to Tel Aviv. They have flights that go everywhere else. And they also have a flight that goes to Beirut. And Ethiopian Airlines, when they get a new plane, they like to name their planes for their favorite cities that they fly to. Well, they weren't thinking, I guess. They flew their brand new plane named Tel Aviv to Beirut. And the Lebanese, who are still technically in a state of war with Israel, got so upset about it, they made the plane stay on the ground until they repainted the plane. Wow. Symbolism at work. All right, let's say hello to some folks here. We've got Harriet and Jim calling in from Richmond. They're always number one every week. We love that. Priya's also calling in from Chicago. Okay. Teddy says, just got back from Japan. Japan does not only have beautiful gardens, but also museums with lovely artwork. The Adachi Museum is just one of them. You got it, Teddy. I appreciate that. Paul's saying hi from Ashland, Virginia. Any tips for the Lausanne area? Oh, yeah. First of all, you said you're going to be there in late June. The weather couldn't be better. Some of the best hotel schools in the world are in Lausanne. If you get a chance to go to one, to see it in operation, you will be blown away by the quality of the students and by the quality of the campus. It's right on the lake. It's so beautiful. Okay, here we go. Melanie says, hi, still in London, visiting my dear old mom, heading back to Miami. Okay, Melanie. Matthew Richards said the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, it's a must-see. I agree. And we've had them on our radio show. They have over 1,000 instruments. It's phenomenal. So thank you for reminding me about that. Michael saying hi from Ohio. How safe is the Upper West Side? I have to go to New York City next week. And is the subway okay? I'm born and raised in New York. I don't need a visa to go to the West Side. And I have no problem taking the subway. All right. Now, I know people are worried about it, but, I always tell people if they have a chance in this life, they should live in Manhattan for at least 1 year of that life. Why? Because it'll teach you how to be streetwise globally. You may not know where to go, but living in New York City will certainly teach you where not to go. And the West Side, of course, is fine, right? You're going to be fine. Okay. Colleen says, hi from blustery Paris. Our best experience so far was the virtual reality tour of the Impressionists opening at Nadar Studios 1878. It's at the Musée d'Orsay. That's my favorite museum in Paris, the former train station. Talk about natural light to display the paintings. It's unbelievable. Okay, Tayo says, just took a domestic flight from BWI to Myrtle Beach on Saturday. And your point? Joy saying, going to Dubai February 25. When is the best time to buy airfare and insurance? Answer, not now. You're way too early. The computers haven't been programmed to project pricing and basically perceive demand. You want to go about 54 to 74 days out. Start 74 days out and make your decision by 54 days out, because that's when the airlines are going to do it, looking at their demand and their load factors year over year, and that's how they're going to set their prices. Okay. Ginger says, I'll be in Portland, Maine at the end of May. I'll be traveling with an 8-year-old child. Do you have family-friendly restaurants and/or activity suggestions? Actually, I do. If you write to me, peter@petergreenberg.com, we'll get you those answers. Bottom line is, you're going at the perfect time before it gets crowded. It'll be a little nippy in the evening, but after all, it's Maine. If you're going swimming, it's going to be very nippy. But the point is, Maine is one of my favorite states simply because of the air. Oh, do I love breathing the air in Maine. And don't think twice if you have to take a nap, because that's what happens when you go. Okay, here we go. Red says, back home now and watching from Omaha. Okay, I follow the Peter Greenberg baggage rule of carry on or lost. You're doing the right thing. April saying hi from Las Vegas. You're very welcome, April. And Sue's hi on my way to SeaTac. to San Antonio. Okay. Michelle says, I always get the aisle seat so I can get to the bathroom easily. Guys, unless you have an incredibly weak bladder, go to the bathroom at the airport before you board the plane, pick the window seat, then nobody's ever going to crawl over you, and you don't have to talk to anybody because your head is either leaning into the right window or leaning into the left window. Put on the headphones, and that's it. Okay, Mary Jo saying hello from sunny PA. I know you always recommend traveling off peak when possible. What about for an Egypt trip? I'd love to avoid crowds, but I also don't want to melt from the heat. Is there a sweet spot? You bet. In fact, I'll be going to Egypt in 3 weeks. That's the sweet spot before you get to June, July, and August, especially the end of June. June, July, and August are lethal in that part of the world. But September, October is great. December is also great, the first 15 days, and January as well. Okay, now you know when. All right, here we go. April says, I don't recline, but maybe airplanes will have to rename seat sections, and like luggage, you may have to fit into the seat you choose or choose the larger seats. You know, that's never going to happen. Finnair made the mistake recently of deciding that they were going to weigh passengers before they boarded the plane. People just wouldn't show up. I mean, why? I mean, we're already in denial about our weight. Now we have to share it with a counter agent? No, forget it. Gregoire is saying hello from Paris. Funny says, I lived in New York City for school. Nothing like it. It does make you more savvy. Of course it does. Paul saying, read that Southwest is leaving a few U.S. cities, Bellingham, Syracuse, Houston, Bush, more on the way. Well, they pulled out actually of 4 markets, and there are 2 reasons for that. One, it goes back to Boeing. Boeing is behind 6,000 planes in terms of new deliveries. You know, their assembly lines have essentially crawled to a stop. And because of that, Southwest can't support the summer schedule they already published. So they're redesigning the schedule. They're pulling out not necessarily unprofitable routes, but routes they literally can't physically service based on their route network right now. That doesn't mean they won't come back to it, but right now they're pulling out of those 4 cities. Okay, let's keep going here. Hold on a second. I'm going to scroll back up. A couple of other things to talk to you about. Of course, Travel Detective 9 is now premiering, our season 9. And in fact, you know what? Let me give you a little clip of what to expect this year, including one very unusual museum.
On this season of The Travel Detective, we'll navigate a new course through uncharted waters in Antarctica, explore the rebirth happening right now in Detroit, test drive some military hardware in an unusual museum near Seattle, and discover the hidden gems of Lexington, Kentucky. Plus, we'll reveal the secrets of the one museum in America you can't visit, but we did. So join me, Peter Greenberg, each week on The Travel Detective.
So how is that for a tease? The one museum you can't go to. I'm not kidding. And it wasn't the museum in Seattle. It was another one. So check that out. Speaking of museums, you can actually take a look at some unusually compelling museums that you can go to on our website right now. Anthony will post that link, and you can watch that. And of course, coming up a little bit later this summer, our next in our series of hidden specials, the 1-hour global specials, Hidden Belize. And that'll be followed by Hidden Uganda. And then we're going to come stateside with Hidden Mississippi, Hidden Louisiana, and Hidden Alabama. So check your local listings. That's on PBS, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus, and YouTube for the rest of our programming for the rest of this year. One other housekeeping note before we get to more questions. Our radio show this week comes from the Santa Maria Valley in the central coast of California, from a small town called Orcutt, O-R-C-U-T-T. Really cool place, and I hope you get a chance to listen. That's this Saturday starting at 10:05 Eastern. If you can't find a listing in your neighborhood, no problem. We stream it live. Just go to our website, petergreenberg.com, and listen in starting at 10:05 Eastern. Let's keep scrolling down here. Hold on a second. And I can get my computer to work here. We will do it. Paul says, love the hidden gems of Beverly Hills. Can anyone get into the car garage or just Peter? Well, you're going to have to watch that clip. That's also airing on our website. We went underneath Beverly Hills. We just didn't talk about Rodeo Drive. As Paul knows, we went underneath. And the answer to your question, Paul, is if you call ahead, you can get in. Someone else just asked for the name of the restaurant I mentioned in that show. And there's an amazing story about that restaurant that I'll share with you in Beverly Hills. The name of the restaurant is Crustacean, run by an amazing Vietnamese family, Helene An and her daughters. But let me tell you the story of how I came in contact with that restaurant. It goes back, believe it or not, to 1975. I was working for Newsweek. Saigon, it was April of 75. Saigon was falling. The war was coming to an end. And we tried to get all of our people out on the last remaining flights out of Saigon. And our people, meaning the people who worked for us in the Newsweek bureau there, we got them out. And like every other Vietnamese refugee, they were flown to where? Not far from where I am right now, Camp Pendleton, California, in Southern California, to the Marine base there, where they erected a complete tent city with like 10,000 refugees. And Newsweek sent me down there to find our family, to get them out and get them a place to stay. And we also promised them a job in the bureau, which we did. It took me about a day and a half to go through all of those refugees to even get close to finding our family, which I did. We got them out. And Helene, another Helene, and her husband and their kids became California residents and later U.S. citizens and worked for Newsweek. Interesting development, though. 20 years later, I was called by a friend of mine and said, hey, there's this new restaurant open in Beverly Hills. We should go check it out. So I went. And it was a Vietnamese restaurant, great food. And during the lunch, someone came over and said, oh, would you like to meet the owner and the chef? She would like to say hello to you. I said, sure. And she walked out and she said, you know, we've met before. I said, we have? She said, yes. Were you walking through the tents in Camp Pendleton to find the Newsweek refugees from Vietnam? Yes. She said, well, when you found them, I was the one with my family sitting next to them. And they left with nothing. And they've now built this amazing restaurant called Crustacean in Beverly Hills. So I hope you got a chance to see the video that we posted on the Hidden Gems of Beverly Hills. Okay. Rory's asking, any restaurant suggestions for Nairobi and Bangkok? Yeah, I do. But they're numerous. There's one in Nairobi called Zen, which I love. And then there's, if you're a carnivore, out by the Wilson Airport, there's a restaurant with the same name, Carnivore. And it's I haven't had meat since November of 2008. However, I miss that restaurant. Forget the Brazilian steakhouses. You got to check out Carnivore in Nairobi. And then in Bangkok, I have too many to name. I really do. As many of you know, I also lived in Bangkok for 25 years. But if you email me, peter@petergreenberg.com, I'll send you a few that you really shouldn't miss. Okay? We've just posted the link for the Beverly Hills Gems. So I hope you get a chance to see that. Okay. Do I think airlines should install shoulder belts instead of lap belts? Would it be better for safety? The answer is absolutely. But no one's going to wear them. They're too cumbersome. They wear them in the cockpit, don't they? And I wear them in my car, and so do you. Here's my issue with seatbelts. And there may be people out there listening and watching right now who will violently disagree with me, and you're free to do that. Seatbelts on planes were designed when airplanes travel down the runway at about 80 miles an hour. They don't travel down the runway at 80 miles an hour now. They travel down the runway at about 160, and they land at around 140. In a aborted takeoff or a hard landing, that seatbelt around your waist could easily, very easily, break your pelvis. And in fact, we've seen all too many cases where that happened, and people who survived a hard landing or a crash basically die because they can't move out of the plane and they die from the toxic fumes. So I'm a contrarian traveler when it comes to that. I will not fasten my seatbelt on takeoff or landing. I know I'm violating the rules. And by the way, if a flight attendant comes over and asks me to do it, of course I will comply. Where I wear my seatbelt is when we're in the air, because clear air turbulence can kill you. And we've seen so many incidents, a couple recently, as a matter of fact, where dozens of people are injured quite seriously when a plane suddenly drops 1,000 feet. So, yeah, that's my rule. But if you had the shoulder harnesses, I would wear them on takeoff or landing because that gives you so much better protection. Okay. Let's go back up here. All right. I'm keeping on scrolling here. Colleen remembers that story. Helene Lam. Yep, it's true. Thank you for mentioning that about our good friend Helene, who sadly passed away about 4 months ago. I was happy and lucky enough to get together with Helene about 6 months ago with her boys for a reunion dinner. I was so glad we were able to do that so many years after 1975. So thank you for reminding me, Colleen. I appreciate that. Okay, now let's go to the photo of the week. All right, anybody want to know what this is? Well, first of all, let's give a big cheer to Theodora Reyes. And Theodora writes, this is a photo of the gardens of the Adachi Museum of Art in Yasugi, Japan. The gardens here have won the award of Best Garden for 21 consecutive years. Cool. Gotta love that. And if you like your photo and you think it qualifies as the photo of the week, you know what to do. Just email it to photocontest@petergreenberg.com. And if we like it, you get right up there next to Theodora. Speaking of Japan, we've done this story a couple of weeks in a row now of how certain communities and cities around the world are trying to manage serious problems of overtourism, right? In Athens, they're trying to limit the number of people crawling up the Acropolis in the middle of July in 100-degree weather from 30,000 a day to 20,000 a day. Venice is now imposing about a €6 fee if you can't prove you have a hotel reservation there. It's not going to do much difference, but they're doing that. Amsterdam has replaced where most cruise ships dock in order to ease congestion, and they've just passed a new law banning all future hotel construction in the city, right? Barcelona took the routes of city buses that go past major tourist attractions off of Google Maps. They want to keep tourists away from the locals. But here's the one that cracked me up. Speaking of Japan, a small town in Japan has now erected a huge barrier, physical barrier, to cover up the view of Mount Fuji. Because it was such a popular selfie destination, they're now making it impossible for you to take a picture of you with the mountain behind you. I mean, that's where we're coming to. You talk about congestion pricing, that's congestion photo op. So there you have on that. Okay, let's go to some questions that have been asked. Here's one from Aaron. Is Venice in Italy a tourist trap? In July and August? Absolutely. Right? The bridge of sighs becomes the bridge of thighs. It's too crowded. I go to Venice in November or February. Sometimes it even floods there, so you bring a pair of boots, but that's when you want to see Venice. Trust me on that. Here's one that I'm having difficulty answering from Jamie. If you had to pick between Amsterdam or Budapest, which would you pick to visit? Well, I'm a fan of both because in both situations, you have rivers and you can use each as a hub to go either up or down the Danube and in Amsterdam, of course, go down to Rotterdam. I love them. I can't give you an answer. I guess what I could tell you is time of year again, just like my answer for Venice. Go off season, you'll have a great time in both. And by the way, this summer, listen to this. Longwoods, the research organization, just came out with this figure that 30% of Americans are planning to spend even more money this summer on their travel. But the most significant finding from the research, only 4% of Americans say they have no plans to travel this summer. What does that tell you about crowds? What does that tell you about capacity on planes? What does that tell you about what hotel rates and airline fares are going to be? Not pretty. So just thought I'd mention that. Okay. Kelly, planning a girls' trip to Croatia in August. Yes, I know it will be busy. Didn't you hear what I just said, Kelly? But which would you recommend? Oh, I see. Well, I love, everyone wants to go to Dubrovnik, and they're all demented Games of Thrones fans. In August, I wouldn't recommend that. However, if you have other places to choose from, I like Hvar and I like Split, and then the small little island that nobody ever goes to of Rab, R-A-B. It was actually a prisoner of war camp during World War II. It was a sort of a mild concentration camp, if you will, run by the Italians for the Germans. And every week the Germans would insist that they put them on a train and send them to the concentration camps like Auschwitz and Dachau. And the Italians just never got around to it because they knew what was happening. They actually saved a lot of people. Now, a lot of people ended up dying there, but not because of torture. They literally ran out of supplies and water. But it's an amazing place to go because it's an unheralded monument to the war that people need to see. All right. Benjamin says, I'm going to the Ritz-Carlton in London. Actually, it's not the Ritz-Carlton in London. It's the Ritz, right? It's the Ritz in London for afternoon tea. What's the most casual outfit I can wear as a man? Well, Benjamin, I know this for a fact. The Ritz has a rather tough policy with no tolerance, no jeans, not even designer jeans. Anything with denim, you can't wear it. You got to wear a jacket and you got to wear a tie. And you got to make a reservation because it's overcrowded all the time. One of the most tough scones to get in London is the high tea at the Ritz. But now you know the dress code. Okay. Mel says, while looking for business class deals for our trip to the U.S., ANA has a UA code share. Remember all the times I'm talking to you guys about the dangers of code shares and the differential problems? Listen to this. ANA has a UA code share flight between the Tokyo-LA leg that is significantly cheaper than riding pure ANA by nearly $1,200. The 787 Dreamliner has the Polaris seats. I assume at the very least ANA will have better food, but given the cheaper code share rate, would UA business class be worth it? The question you have to ask is, if it's a code share flight, who is operating the plane? It's the same plane. So if it's the same plane and one fare is cheaper, no brainer, you pick the cheaper flight. I've seen flights from Dulles to Frankfurt on United and a code share flight on Dulles to Frankfurt on Lufthansa on a flight operated by United, and the Lufthansa flight, same plane on United, is $600 more. How can that be? Well, because it's different inventory and they price it differently for people who can sometimes be idiots. Do the math. It's the same plane. Pick the cheaper fare. Okay. And by the way, anybody who's watching me right now who gets on a flight because of the quality of the meal, we'll have a therapy session immediately following our global travel update. Okay. Joy says, when exploring a foreign country, do you carry your passport or leave it behind at your accommodation? Well, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other with one caveat. You better take a photocopy of the photo page of your passport and put that in a safe place. So if there's a problem, the U.S. consulate can actually move faster at replacing it. But as a matter of rule for me, I always carry it with me. And if I'm going down the rapids, you can go to REI or any of the great outfitters and get waterproof bags to carry those kind of documents. Okay, but I don't really leave home without it or leave hotel without it. Amber says we have a 4-hour morning layover in Munich. Is it worth leaving the airport? Answer: no. Frederick, I know you have to go with a group, but I love traveling off the beaten path. I want to go to some remote monasteries and places that people normally don't see in Tibet. What tourist companies would be best for me? Again, email me to peter@petergreenberg.com. I will answer that for you because using your base in Lhasa, you can see a lot of stuff, but you definitely need to go with a group. They limit access to that. And if you're going to be in Lhasa, remember I said I've had no meat since November of 2008. One of the things they specialize in Lhasa, and in fact, there's a Holiday Inn in Lhasa that was known for it. You ready? You know what they serve? Yak burgers. If you've never had one, you should have one. I did have one, and I've never had one since. I rest my case. But hey, you only traveled to Tibet once, right? So check it out. All right, let's keep going here with a couple of other housekeeping items. Again, our radio show, Eye on Travel, airing Saturday from the Santa Maria Valley in California. Hope you get a chance to see it. I'm traveling again. And of course, I'll see you next week from another distant remote location. And bottom line, if you're traveling into Europe this summer, don't forget European Rule 261. We're still waiting for a passenger Bill of Rights in this country, but the Europeans have outpaced us for years with EC 261. If your flight is delayed or canceled, you get cash right away. And if it's canceled, you get accommodations and meals. Don't expect the airlines to volunteer it, but the minute you say EC 261, they now know that you know, and you get taken care of. By the way, that applies not just to European carriers, but to any carrier flying to, from or within Europe, and in many cases, that's U.S. carriers. They have to comply with it as well. So I just wanted to say that. Let me quickly go before I run out of time here. Give me a second. We're scrolling through. Other people have added in here. Give me 1 second. Okay. We've done that one. We've also listed the compelling museums link you can watch. Holland says, hello from Portugal. We went to Antarctica last year. I fell in love with a whole new continent. Easy to do. Okay. I'm still going here. Hold on. Rory did hear of carnivore, so he'll check that out. With the conflict war in the Middle East, is it safe to travel to Egypt this year? Well, guess where I'm going in 2.5 weeks. It's safe to travel to those locations if you know what you're doing. It's like living in New York, right? You know where to go and you know where not to go. If there's a riot in Cincinnati, that does not mean I can't go to Cleveland, right? Is it safe to go to Israel now? Yes. Is it safe to go to Jordan now? Yes. Is it safe to go to Egypt now? Yes. Is it safe to go to Syria now? No. All right? I mean, common sense, right? But listen, Egypt depends on their GDP, an overwhelming amount, percentages, on travel and tourism. It's in their best interest to not only be welcoming, but be safe. And there's a huge impact on that if they're not. So I was in Egypt during Arab Spring. I was in Tahrir Square, and I did not feel unsafe. Think about that. Yes. Were there some riots for the first 2 days? Yes. Did it get a little violent for 2 days? Yes. 12 blocks away from Tahrir Square, there were feluccas floating down the Nile having a ball, right? I was in Nairobi during the shootout. Remember the shootout in Nairobi? I covered that for CBS. Literally 1 mile away, people were heading out to the Masai Mara on their safaris. No problem. Get an atlas, get local knowledge, get the local English newspaper and read it for the last 3 weeks. You can do that online. And then you can make an informed, intelligent decision as to whether or not you should go. And I apply that to everywhere I go, not just Egypt, okay? Keep going here. Red says, speaking of Athens, there are so many archaeological gems at street level. I couldn't agree with you more. You don't have to go crawling up to the Acropolis. All right, Jeff says, I'm one of the 4%, no big trip until China in September. Well, okay, but no hats off to you for me. If you have a chance to travel, you should. I'm not making a judgment. All right, here we go. Do I believe the prices of cruises will come down? Not this year. I mean, the number of cruisers this year versus last year is already up something like 12%. And if you're up 12%, you're already in the million mark level. So law of supply and demand. There are new cruise lines, not new lines, new cruise ships coming out. The Silver Race coming out next month in Portugal. That's from Silver Sea. The Queen Anne, the latest in the Queen series from Cunard, just showed up in Southampton yesterday morning, I believe, and they'll be cruising. But those ships are already sold out on their inaugural cruises. So the smart move to do is to pick a ship that's 2, 3, or 4 years old that is just as good and get yourself an inside middle cabin. We've talked about the smartness of that move, and you'll be okay. Okay. And Rory says, does that negate the need for extra insurance coverage? Well, remember, every coverage that you get for insurance has exclusions. Some of them have pre-existing medical exclusions. Some of them have destination exclusions. Some of them have age exclusions. So you want to get an insurance policy that's best fit for you, that's actually to cover you for your specific needs. Do not buy it online, ever. Go through a travel agent or a travel advisor. They can negotiate the hieroglyphics of that policy to let you know what you're covered for, and most importantly, what you're not. Okay. Sharon says, should I risk St. John's in November? Are you talking St. John's in Newfoundland? If you are, of course you can risk it. You know why? You dress warmly and visit a couple of the bars and restaurants, and the locals will be treating you wonderfully, right? And the same great lobster sandwiches in November that you get in July. I mean, look, I don't go to St. John's to get a suntan. I go to St. John's to immerse in what? The culture and the history. So there you go. All right. We're out of time. Again, Eye on Travel this Saturday. Check your local listings. You have all the information for the Travel Detective premiering this month on PBS and all of our other shows. You have the links. If you got other questions, do not hesitate to write me, peter@petergreenberg.com, and we'll answer them either this week or on the air next week. Have a great rest of the week, everybody. Happy May. Thank you to Anthony for handling this for us here in Los Angeles, and I'll see you next week.